Welcome to the ArcFluence podcast, where we talk about how design impacts the way we live, work, and invest. I'm Nick Caracan, your host, and with me today is my co-host and business partner, Paul Fatkins. Welcome, Paul.
Hey, who's missing?
Somebody's missing.
Something.
I don't know. Somebody's missing, but
no, wait. We got Danny.
We got Danny.
Stella's here.
Stella's here. I don't know. I think this is everyone.
Okay.
Wait.
There's a third person, right? Nino.
Right. He
yeah.
doesn't really. He just asks interesting questions and doesn't really contribute that much.
We'll give him a
anyways.
break because it is his birthday.
Okay. Birthday weekend.
Birthday weekend. Yeah.
All right. Fair enough. We miss you, Nino. We are going to be talking about ADUs, accessory dwelling units, and what that means for architecture and real estate and our lives.
Yeah. I think this is a great topic. I know in terms of just housing, right, and how housing has been handled everywhere in the country. I mean, this is not just like a Columbus topic. This is something that it's an issue everywhere, and this is something that can help basically alleviate some of the issue of, the housing crisis, shortage of housing units, not going into we'll get into it, but again, it's just like,
well, let's talk about it. So an ADU to me, I immediately go to income property, right? So I'm thinking, okay, great. I'm going to have another door and a rental unit, whether it's Airbnb, whether it's a short-term rental, whether it's mid-term rental, whether it's long-term tenant, or whether it's just a place I can have family stay, at least down the road, like I'm planning for the future. And quite frankly, it could also be an office for me, right?
Yeah. See, I don't necessarily, I think we talked about the episode before, having people come in and out, right? So it's like, if it's my personal single family home that I'm living in, right? Because a lot of these are, a lot of these are single family homes that the unit is being added to on the same lot. So it's already existing development, existing neighborhood, existing community, and you're basically building this apartment unit next to your house.
So typically you're going to own this land already, so your costs are going to be down on this investment type.
I mean, affordability wise to build it, sure. I mean, like, you don't have land to buy. It's typically a smaller unit, stuff like that. But for me to go to the Airbnb thing or short-term rental, right? I just don't feel like I would. So for me, what I jump to is more like, again, like the housing shortage. And, I have family that comes from a different country on my wife's side. And so it's like having a place for them to be, right, on the same lot.
You were forced to buy a bigger house.
Yeah, it would have been nice to buy a smaller house with a dwelling unit, right, associated with it. Because then I also get my separation from them, and I don't have to have everybody in the same household necessarily.
Well, let's talk about that. There are a few different types of ADUs that people are implementing here and across the country. Sometimes we see them in the basement of the home, right? Yeah. They have the separate entry.
I was going to say, let's take one step back.
Sure.
So let's go to the beginning of it.
All right.
Because basically, countrywide, it was not really, especially here in the States, it was not really considered a thing that people did, right?
Right. I mean, you saw a lot of it in Europe. You see a lot of it around the world.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that exists and is out there. But in terms of the United States, jurisdictions, cities, counties, states don't really have rules and regulations that allow it. Even in Columbus right now, it's limited. So it was 2017.
LA.
Yeah. California as a state released a law that opened up the possibility, ease these restrictions on these accessory dwelling units. And from that point forward, LA said, you know what, we're going to be the champions of this because
they had to be. They had to be. Overcrowdedness, the cost of living was outrageous. Yeah.
Yeah. I think like for, parking space size apartment, like, 10 by 20, you're paying like $500,000 in Los Angeles for something like that. Like some little micro unit. Like, it's just pricing out there is ridiculous. Housing is ridiculous. And a lot of it's developed and they don't have room to keep growing and expanding out. I mean, it's already sprawling and crazy, right?
Yeah.
So for them, they're like, we're going to be the champions of this and we're going to write the book on how to do it.
And that kind of showed up in 3 different scenarios off the top of my head, at least. Some were created in the basement. And they had their separate walkout. They have that division of separation from the house, the main house and the basement unit. Sometimes we see them in the garage, where we actually convert a freestanding garage to, we sacrifice that parking and now we have a dwelling there.
Yeah.
Sometimes we tear down that garage, we build a carriage house, which we're going to talk about one of our projects that we did. And then I guess there is a fourth. Sometimes we just see a freestanding structure that's in the backyard that, because of the larger lot size, they had the ability to drop in some prefab design in the backyard and utilize that as, whatever they're able to. And a lot of times that kind of translates into home office in that particular version of it.
Yeah. I mean, but the change from when they started basically creating an easier process within the couple of years, it was 1/5,
20%
of all permits in the city of Los Angeles were for these ADU units.
Yeah.
And that compares to like Seattle around the same time, 2% of the applications for permits were basically this accessory dwelling units. So other cities do. I mean, like we have units here in Columbus too, but again, you're talking like an amount that's 10 times more within a city limit, just because the rules and regulations and process are easier.
And I believe that was back in 17, 18 when they were first getting things off the ground. I think it's stabilized somewhat these days. And I mean, I have family in Seattle, so I know that it's something that's talked about quite often. People are adding ADUs constantly, but there are limitations to it. There are city guidelines that have been created, and there are standards and there are rules and regulations on what you can do with it, how long, and certain restrictions there.
Yeah. I think even in LA, they actually have even a pre-approved list of units that you can like buy from the city. They have programs to help with like property management, finding project managers, contractors.
Yep. And this streamlines the process to make it easy. It's kind of an incentive for people to take action and do this.
Yeah. So for me, that's where everything started, was around that time frame where they kind of opened the floodgates and said, let's do this thing. We have a crisis. We need to address the issues here, and we can't just keep going the route that we're going because nothing's going to change. We need to change something. And I think for them, it's been a huge thing.
No, I think it's a great opportunity for a lot of different types of people.
I know Columbus, the whole reason why we went to that zone in meeting, the whole reason why Columbus wanted to change their zoning regulations, number one reason, housing. So they looked at these corridors as like the first step to help address some of the housing shortage. And again, like affordable housing, they even allow, again, these increased heights and increased footprints for basically, or increased demand. So you have more units within the building if you have affordable units within your building.
Yes.
So that's their number one concern. And again, I don't know why they're, so if they're listening, they should look to cities like LA to open up some of the ADU units here. Because this process we went through with our client was just not a fun process.
No, how long did it take us? Like 9 months?
It was almost a year total. Almost a year total from conception to final approval. Now, granted, this was also within the Victorian Village Commission, so there was special requirements on top of special requirements.
Sure.
On top. I mean, you had so many hoops to jump through.
Right. And they were pushing back on the original house design too, and I think that we redesigned the house as well, so that incorporated into that timeline as well.
Yeah, well, because it's not allowed, it's not permissible to go and just do whatever you want with your unit back there. They had to get variances. So because of the variances, there was existing things with the house where they're like, well, listen, since you're going through the variance process anyway, let's get it documented and shown within so there was things with the house that had to play into it too. But I mean, regardless, you had to go through the commission, you had to go through the variance process to get the even approval to do this. And then you were finally like cleared through both parties to then finally get to in front of the building department.
Right. And listen, it is a complicated process in some cases, but let's take just a small step back and see how it really can open up the options for homeowners, for investors. For example, like I know interest rates are coming down, but that's another factor that kind of plays into people moving in general. Like if you have a home and you're a smaller home, your family's growing, you want to get into something bigger that can accommodate your family's needs. Well, let's do an addition, or let's build another ADU that can supplement our space, whether it be office, parents, visitors, guest bedroom, whatever.
Do you know why I think these are also an attractive idea? Let's say instead of doing an addition, you're ripping you have to connect it somehow. How are you connecting from one section of the house to the other?
Breezeway.
Well, no, not like the dwelling unit. I'm talking about like if you do an addition.
Okay.
There's construction that's going to be going on with your existing house.
It's more expensive. Yeah.
Well, and it's also more disruptive to your life because you don't have your existing house that's intact, and then you're building this thing within your lot.
Right.
You're building an addition onto your house. So I mean, again, you're disrupting your existing single family home.
Let's just say, hey, we just need more space, right? I have no intention of renting this out. I don't need another apartment right now in my life, but I need more space for my family. Well, okay, if we're now being thoughtful about the future, saying, look, for a little bit more, we're already going to spend this amount of money, right? If we spend a little bit more to make this a true functional apartment for future use later, now we can use the space for what we need it to be now. And then down the road, when the kids move out or whatever, or where our circumstances change, it's an income property, right? It's a stream of revenue for that property as well.
Even if it isn't that, say you go to sell the house down the road, right? So let's say, okay, the kids move off and whatever, and you're not necessarily thinking about renting it out, or, grandparents come to help with the kiddos and they're living in the unit and then they leave and kiddos are older, whatever. So circumstances change. What if you want to sell it? Again, it's just value in general, whether you rent it or sell it.
Just the functionality of it. So in LA, we saw this a lot when they first opened the floodgates on these loose zoning laws. But basically, like, what if we have a young couple who's starting out their life and they want to live in the city, but they can't afford to live, right? The housing market's is just a little bit too expensive. It's going to make them uncomfortable. What if there's a rental income that's going to help with that mortgage payment? So it's actually allowing some people to afford to buy housing.
Yeah. Well, buy rent basically, right? Because somebody, again, like whoever owns it.
I'm saying they buy the house. They buy the house with the ADU, and that mortgage alone would be a struggle for them.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
But if they rent out that property, that income's going to offset that cost and allow them to be able to be homeowners.
I was actually thinking different generation, younger generation. They're coming fresh out of college, and like you said, maybe they want to live in a certain place, so they find someone who has an ADU. And that's an option for them to rent, right? And
that's also correct.
Yeah, someone who's older and it's like, great, I have one and I need someone to rent here, great.
Yeah. Well, even if you have say you're in your 30s or 40s and you have the credit and everything to buy a home, it's still a stretch in some cases to live in certain markets.
Yeah. I think it always is. When you're trying to balance your budget, you're always trying to maximize what you're getting for what you're paying. And it's always that fine dance of what's your income, what's your debt ratio to your, all these things are factoring in.
This is a great way to offset those costs and honestly dip your toe in the water for the next step too. Like if this is something that you can manage successfully and you're okay with it, maybe you scale, maybe you get another rental property, and eventually it becomes this whole different concept of building wealth and retiring early, or at least retiring comfortably.
Yeah. I know that was one of the concerns that LA had over, opening this up and allowing basically an easier process to get all these approvals. They were worried about the character of the community, parking situation, and just basically people coming in and saying, great, I'm in a short-term rental everywhere.
Yeah.
And honestly, it really hasn't happened. Yes, there are people that do it, but to the extent that they were worried about it, I think it's, again, to address the housing crisis is more of an issue than worried about character from short-term renters coming and going.
I mean, I'm on the conservative side when it comes to like fiscal issues and things of that nature. And I think
you're just thinking the money coming in and you're...
Well, listen, I don't want people to be able to necessarily tell me what I can do with my property. I'd like to have as many options as possible. So everyone's using it. It's hard to do blanket legislative, policy to govern everybody because we're all different phases of our lives and we all have different circumstances. So
I'm in the middle because I think it should be more open. I also like a certain amount of regulation because, again, like, you want to maintain your character. You want someone to design it thoughtfully so it fits in with the surroundings. You want something that's appropriate. So again, if it's just open and the wild, wild west out there and it's like whatever goes. But I mean, like, also that's job security for us, just to throw that out there to you.
Sure.
Because it's like, again, if anyone can do anything to what you just said, to that point, it's like, maybe that also is not so good. So I find...
No, I think you're right. There's a compromise because if I live in a neighborhood, I don't want my neighbor making the wrong decisions
Correct.
that's going to hurt my property value.
Yeah.
So I think,
Or just be an eyesore, whether it
Yeah.
doesn't hurt your, say the property value is still the same, still, if it's an eyesore, it's an eyesore.
and that's why a lot of these guidelines are in place. Location, size, setbacks on the property, and just overall appearance.
I know in the beginning, I think, again, LA, going back to LA, I don't think they had any of those regulations in place. And then very quickly, they discovered some of the concerns and they said, great, we're going to start with a guideline. We're going to have a few regulations to kind of stipulate style, size, setback, stuff like that.
Right. And I know in other cities like Seattle, they limited how many Airbnbs you can have per person, which is going to be like, instead of trying to get all these properties out there and up just for income and cut corners or whatever's needed to get these up and rented, let's be thoughtful about it. Like let's add to the value of these properties, not just a cash flow play.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not familiar with Seattle. You have family that's out there, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Do they know people with any ADU units?
Sure. Yeah. It's very common. It's very popular, and everybody is always leaning towards that as soon as they can afford to do it.
Yeah, I know the article at least that started this whole conversation between us was coming off of Arc Daily. We'll put a link up to it, but yeah, in the article they were focused solely just on LA because they were the ones really driving the bus. Basically, I think other cities have followed their lead. Basically,
well, you got to look at what's happened the last few years too with COVID and people working from home. Yeah. So I mean, it's not just a rental. It's not just for in the Midwest we call these mother-in-law suites.
Yeah.
And now it's really serving as a home office too. So it really varies. Like it's a very versatile space.
Yeah.
I think it adds a lot of property value.
Yeah, I know in the beginning when you said that was the first thing you thought of. Like I mentioned, having the family coming from a different culture, something like that mother-in-law suite. Yeah. That, something, just a separate space for them to be, and also be right there with us.
Yeah.
So, and I get the whole, like, just another space to use for your office or whatever. A lot of times now, even multi-generational housing is a thing. So whether, like I have older parents that are getting up there in age, who knows, maybe at some point, like they'll be coming to live with us so that we can help manage.
It is super common all over the world for generational housing. We are getting a lot of requests now. We're just started a project right now where they wanted to do a carriage house or separate, a second home on the property.
Which very quickly we're like,
zoning doesn't allow it.
So we're like, do you want to? How soon do you want this? Do you want this within the year, or from a year from now? You maybe think about beginning.
So there's some strategy behind it. So basically, we had to look at zoning and we're saying, hey, in this particular neighborhood, you can't just build a second home. You can't build a carriage house. There's a long process and it's not guaranteed for approval. So this is probably our best strategy here. Let's build an addition to the house. They're not going to have a problem with that. Yeah. And we can essentially build the same type of secondary dwelling apartment that you need for your parents, which is what they're building it for.
Yep. But it's attached. So technically it's all part of the same structure.
Right. So when we're attaching, an ADU to a house.
And it can, by the way, it cannot just be a breezeway.
Right.
It has to be enclosed.
A conditioned space.
Habitable space, be it a hallway or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Something has to connect that and actually be part of the space that you inhabit.
And we can get creative. Like in this particular case, we spoke about doing this really upscale mudroom, laundry room area. We're bringing the laundry from the basement up to the main floor, and we're creating this zone in the middle where we can come in from the parking, from the driveway, and you can go to the left to want the left wing, which is going to be their apartment, or you can go to right to the house. And in this common space now we have all this function with laundry, half bath, mudroom, etc., which I think is awesome.
Yeah. And just to jump back to the one comment you made, obviously, like you said, say you don't do the addition, you choose to do the longer process. It's not that yes, you're right, it's not guaranteed to get approval, but it's not necessarily like the cities are fully opposed to it. I know, especially in Columbus, like I said, the whole reason they did the zoning, the number one thing was the housing crisis. Yeah. So if you're proposing an ADU somewhere in Columbus, Columbus is definitely very receptive to it, but there's a process to go through.
Well, with all the different municipalities here, there are some that aren't also.
It depends. I mean, you could be in, Delaware County, and in Delaware or whatever, Sunbury or whatever, somewhere around the Columbus area, or even Dublin has their own regulations, or Grove City, or so. Every city jurisdiction is going to be different for how they look at it. I know Columbus, like for the carriage house that we did in the Victorian Village, it was definitely something that was receptive, but we had to go through that whole process.
And that process,
if you go to Grove City, they might have a different tone on what they feel in terms of allowing it or not allowing it.
And it's interesting too. Like some investors, like they'll want to keep costs down, right? Naturally, and even homeowners, and they'll want to try to do that process themselves. In this particular case, it didn't really work out to their advantage. They went to a few meetings, and there was a lot of stuff that needed to be covered and addressed. So we then went to, actually, I think we only had to go to one to get the initial.
We went to two. Actually, no, we went to two or three. Well, you went to one. I think I went to a couple more.
Paul always outworking me.
Yeah. So I just had to go and sit and look pretty. Because again, especially for that process, they were receptive to it. They had a few questions. They wanted to see a few things differently, notate a few things, But I mean, for the most part, they weren't wholly opposed to it. So, but even then, Columbus could change their tone on it. And again, guaranteed approval is just not a thing.
And I do think, again, this one was a little special because of the commission of that particular neighborhood and the hardy board requirements, the sconce requirements, the roofing materials, the window,
we had to go through and do like these, basically, we obtained some drone images even like of the site, so that they could see the relationship to the character of the neighborhood around it, to the house, right? So it's like an overview of the whole lot. And we had to do different views, like views from the alley, views from, these aerial perspectives showing kind of like the entire context. They wanted to see a bunch of stuff. They wanted to see sections that had, the relationship to the house. What's the height relationship? What's the, what does the side look like? Oh, we want you to add a window down in the garage space, even though it's a garage.
We had to address parking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they wanted a whole slew of things, basically.
Right. Now, if you're on the corridor, obviously some of those things go out the window, which is great. But if you're in some of these neighborhoods, we still run into some challenges.
And unfortunately, I think a majority of the corridors, though, like while, yes, it does incentivize stuff for housing, a majority of the corridors are still commercial in nature. Right. So like your friend that we're doing the project for that has the woodworking shop, technically he's on the corridor. And so, if there's certain things that he wants to do, great. He doesn't have to go through the variance process. But I mean, his building is a woodworking shop. It's like a commercial space. Right. Basically, that's what it was before. It's probably what it's going to be after. It's not like a single family home on the corridor.
Well, along the lines of thinking with all, the reason they did this zoning is because it was really needed, but also because of the hundreds or maybe was it thousands of variance requests?
Just for the corridors. In the thousands. Yeah.
So I think as we start seeing higher numbers and more requests for ADUs outside of that, in these neighborhoods and stuff, I think.
Well, I know phase 2 is coming. So phase 2 for Columbus is coming for their zoning initiative. Phase 1 was just the corridors, which is approved and on the books. The phase 2, they are going to look at other things. And again, if they're listening, I hope they really look hard at these ADU units. And, great, provide some rules, provide some regulations, but open it up some and allow for some more freedom so that you don't have to jump through all these hoops to get something like this done.
Yeah.
I agree with you. Like the regulation that they have there is definitely frustrating. If they can open it up some, that'd be great.
I did want to talk a little bit about the design and the thoughtfulness behind some of these ADUs that we're starting to see go up. A lot of them are modern in nature, which is great. We're also seeing but again, I think an important thing and another concern, again, fitting into the community. Yeah.
Because again, all of these are not a piece of dirt that you're developing, going into farmland, destroying farmland, building a house, whatever, right? It's an existing community, existing house that you're building next to. So if your house looks like a Cape Cod cottage and you build this modern looking shoebox, whatever you want to call it, container, just like shipping container style or something industrial, it's going to clash with your house and with the neighborhood, because maybe the rest of the neighborhood is probably in that Cape Cod style.
Well, if you go with that type of design and that type of neighborhood, you're going to want to have some screening. Obviously, you're not going to want to have direct views from the the curb, it might be in the backyard or something like that. If it's in an established neighborhood with like an alley access and we're doing more of a carriage house style, it's essentially going to reflect a smaller version of the actual house. So there's that connection with the architecture.
I think, again, like I think some regulation for the style is definitely needed. Even like I said, even LA that has their pre-approved list of houses that you can pick from. It's on the city website. You can go and pick a pre-approved design.
I think that was smart. But most of those are very small spaces, and a lot of them didn't have bathrooms. They're really more like offices. I guess there's definitely some
it's plans. A full unit.
Yeah,
full unit. Yeah.
I know the because of a cost factor too is like if people were working from home, that was just huge for them to like buy this room. And it's literally just a room that's conditioned that they plop in the backyard.
But it's like if you want the modern aesthetic, like they have ones that have more modern aesthetic with the pre-approved list. But again, even if you pick that, if it's clashing with everything that's around you and with your house, they're not just going to let you do it.
Okay.
Right. But again, like that's, I think, where a design professional comes in to help you through that process. So it's like, great, I want a modern aesthetic and my house is like a farmhouse style. Right. So then you do a more modern farmhouse take on it. Right. And you have the designer help you through some of the details of what it's going to look like so that it doesn't clash. And then, you can also work on, I agree with you, like with the views in terms of like some screening or something with not direct views. Maybe you set it back as far as possible if you have a big enough lot. So, I mean, there's other things that you can factor into it. And I think that's where the design professional comes in to help you evaluate what's the best play here.
So what about the interiors, Paul? What are we seeing there?
I mean, again, you just have to check all your boxes. You need your, kitchen space, which is like very small, right? It's nothing grand, nothing. You're talking like
depending on the square footage, but typically it's going to be a lot smaller.
All of these ADU units, it's like enough for 1 to 2 people to live there comfortably.
Yep.
So, and you don't need a giant kitchen,
but
right?
because of the small square footage, we are seeing higher ceilings. So a lot of times we're seeing 9 or 10 foot ceilings for some, especially for some of these prefabs.
Or you do vaulted ceilings, right? Yep. In the upper space. If you did like a carriage house situation with the lower space, the upper space, you vault the upper area, right? Something like that. And then garages are the other conversion too. So if you have an existing 20 by 20 footprint, so it's basically like 2 parking spaces and you have to fit in your kitchen, your bathroom, living, dining, bedroom. So you fit all that stuff in that box. And then again, maybe you blow the top off of your garage and you vault all that so that everything feels open and grand.
Unless you want a rooftop terrace for some entertainment, which we've also started to see.
Yeah.
I know one other thing we're doing is we're not including gas line or gas appliances. We're going all electric for these units just to keep it simplified, keep costs down, and also make it a little bit less on the liability side for if it does become a rental property.
Yeah. Well, that and like, again, just like efficiency too. Maybe you want to do like some solar panels on there as well. Maybe you have a generator backup system, battery backup system in your house, and you can connect off of that and have everything off of your system. Right. So there's different things to consider too. But I mean, like my condo in Chicago, we had electric furnace and all that. So it was like, again, just like for the condo, it was again a smaller footprint. So same idea here. And you just want something that's efficient, easy, and it's all in the same system. So everything's electric.
Yep. Yeah. What else are we seeing from a space planning standpoint? Probably the larger bedroom. So that at least so we can, obviously it's going to be on the smaller side, but large enough to fit a king. Right. Yeah. So we have some flexibility for the sleeping quarters. 1 bedroom, let's make it count.
Yeah. And it's usually not, unfortunately, again, just space constraint. It's usually not connected to a bathroom. It's not a master, primary suite situation.
And it doesn't need to be if it's just,
There's no half bath or anything like that. You don't really have like a mud room. So again, there's certain things that no pantry, there's certain things that spatially you basically have to make accommodation for.
Smaller closets.
Or compromises for, I should say, to basically.
Stackable laundry.
Yeah. So, I mean, like those are all the things. So again, it's just think of like a condo in New York, condo in Chicago.
And that's
a space like that is basically what you get here.
And I did that for a decade. Like I love designing
in Chicago,
luxury apartments in New York City. Like that was fun for me. So it's kind of like, it's easy for me to get into this role.
But like all those things you mentioned, like we had stackable laundry, so like all those things you just tick through, we didn't have a half bath, so it's like a condo living basically in these accessory dwelling units.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, with the way housing prices are, this is something I think that just cities need to really open up to and make it an easy process. So yeah, I definitely applaud LA and everything that they're doing. Even their permit process, they've just like smoothed out everything in terms of getting approvals.
Let's talk about outdoor spaces for these ADUs, potentially impacting the main household. I'm in the camp of trying to add a separate private space for the ADU that's not going to impede with the house, which is sometimes difficult, especially on these small city lots. That's why we've had a party deck that we've done on top, or we just had, it's fairly simple design. You know, we have stairs that go up to the rooftop.
I think at a minimum you do like a balcony at least, something like that. I agree. Like you should have some outdoor space. It's difficult because if you have a small backyard and you might be taking up, especially if you convert like a garage, you might be sharing like a 10-foot rear yard from the house to the garage. And so like, that's it. That's the space.
And listen, that's okay. If you're using this as an extension of your own home, like for a home office or for a mother-in-law suite or guest house, that's fine. We can share this backyard, this area, and have access to that. I think having that balcony or that rooftop patio or something that's private specific to that unit gives you a little more flexibility down the road if you may want to pivot and have that be solely a separate rental that's not going to necessarily interact with the main household.
Yeah. I mean, there's other things you can do too. You can put up privacy screening, put up like a wall and have some vines or something growing on it if you want some green, or you just leave it as like a privacy wall, right? Something like some nice cedar or whatever to basically help screen. And then you can have just a small little, enough for like 2 chairs and like a small little fire pit or something, or a grill station. And that's it. That's all it is.
Right.
So again, like think efficiency, like everything is down to a smaller size. Even like your outdoor space, it's going to be a small patio, 2 chairs and like a grilling station, done.
Yep.
So, but yeah, I agree. Like, I think if you can fit in a space like that, great. And obviously it just depends on your lot and depends on, if it makes sense or not. Yeah. We did 3 different site plans for a project in Whitehall, 3 projects in Whitehall. And based on where the existing house was, and these weren't ADUs, but these were garages. But again, like based on where they had built the house, having the garage location
really impacted the size of the backyard.
Yeah, it just was not possible to have really a nice backyard. The front yard was great because they set these houses back so far.
Well, they wanted to maintain the street and the curb appeal, so they have these setbacks for the front yard that everyone needs to follow.
Well, that was the odd thing about those projects, though, because technically they could have gone like 20 feet closer to the front.
Yeah.
But for whatever, anyway. But again, thinking about these ADU situations, that homeowner who's in that house that we did this garage for, maybe down the road they want to do an ADU. Well, again, just based on everything the way it worked out, they're going to have a really small backyard. So, a lot of these things you just have to look at, and a lot of it's all existing. The community is existing, the house is existing, and you just have to look at it. They're all unique, and you have to look at what you have and factor that into your design.
Every project is. That's why I mean, you can shop for inspiration online, but really, you need to consult a design professional and be thoughtful on how you pursue some of these additions to your home.
Yeah. I think it's a different story when you have like a new build development. So, again, when we're talking about these ADUs, even for us to come in and, our process, we scan and document all the existing conditions a certain way because you have those constraints that you have to work with and design around. And if you're not thoughtful to the existing conditions, you're going to get something that's an eyesore or just doesn't make sense.
Yep.
So
I have seen the cost of these apartment appliances come down a little bit. Remember back in the day, these smaller, like odd sized refrigerators were so expensive, and now I feel like the market's kind of meeting us a little bit halfway.
I think back to our college days, like we had like
that was really small.
Yeah,
that was too small.
I know. But I'm just saying, like, that's because I've never lived, like, even again back to Chicago, which is probably the unit I lived in that's most relatable to these ADUs. We had a full size fridge.
Oh, so in New York, I think we had a 30-inch.
Well, New York is a bit of a different animal than Chicago. Chicago is a little more space.
Yeah.
Yeah. You were in the one. You were what, Upper West Side or upper? You were close to the park, right?
Upper West Side. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a shoebox. Sorry,
I love that place. It was great. Floor
location,
walk up.
Location was fantastic. Few of the other items.
Sure. Yeah. No, we turned our hallway, our wide hallway, into the owner did rather. They converted the large wide hallway into the living room, kitchen area, and turned the kitchen into like a second bedroom. Really tried to squeeze everything out of it.
Yeah, New York is a little bit of a different animal.
Yeah.
I mean, but so you went from did you go from that place to your place over in Queens?
Yeah. Well, we rented in Queens first before we ended up buying.
Okay. So anyway, I just remember how small that apartment was though when you were in Manhattan.
Yeah.
When you went to Queens and finally bought your property, you had some outdoor space. Was that a game changer? It wasn't much.
Life changing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Everyone's like, "You're rich. You got a dishwasher and a 10 by 10 patio? Oh my goodness."
Yeah. So, I remember you guys were just thrilled with especially having that outdoor space.
No, I could have stayed there, but we got a knock on the door and an offer we couldn't refuse.
Yeah. But anyway, your appliance sizes that you mentioned, right? I've never experienced appliances, but college was the only time when it was that really small refrigerator.
They have some really nice, like Smeg makes some really cool smaller fridges. I mean, these are taller, full height fridges, maybe even taller than that, but they're just skinny, right? So maybe even they're 24 inches wide, but they're just these super tall. So you can still put some stuff in there. Not made for a family of 5 or 4, but you're in an apartment. Right. Yeah. 1 or 2 bedrooms.
Yeah. Again, all of these things are always 1 or 2 people. Yeah. That's it. So, And I wish I had something like this. For me, it's the privacy thing, right? So if I have family come in, they get their own space, I get my own space.
Yeah.
So
what happens when these ADUs are where we can't do a separate, dwelling, where we have to do this addition? So this project that we're getting into right now is really exciting. We have to have it attached. How are we going to be thoughtful to create that privacy there?
Yeah. Doors are going to be king, right? So you think about the access point from the existing to the new. Obviously, if you have like an existing mudroom hallway situation, that's where your connection point should be, where if you can come into a common mudroom area and then branch off left and right, great. There's a wall and a door on each side. You come into the common entry and left and right, done. Yeah. So it all depends. We did a house in Upper Arlington, which they finished. We actually have some pictures, I think, on our website of that one as well.
Yeah, it turned out great.
And that was basically this mother-in-law suite. And you came down a staircase, and then it was kind of like on the backside of the kitchen. And so, but then it was like you came into a kitchen that was also adjacent to a kitchen, and they didn't have doorways and stuff, but the way you kind of meandered through, it still gave enough privacy in the living room, dining, kitchen area, and then the stairs up to the sleeping area was off in the backside to where it created enough separation.
And they still had common spaces between the main home and that addition.
Yeah, they had enough like bleeding over, but there was enough meandering, and where you located the different elements offered enough privacy.
And in this particular case, we also shared a lot of outdoor amenities too, which is what the client wanted. Yeah. So I like to be mindful on shared space.
Yeah, but I think something like that's okay, right?
Yeah, I do too. I want to force that interaction, right? So we can force activation with architecture. But I also want to have that private space for somebody. Like, what if you just want a coffee by yourself? What if I just want to get away from everybody else that I'm connected to and just have a moment for me?
Yeah. So sometimes you have too many moments. It's all right. I have moments too.
Yes, you do.
Deep down. Yeah. But that was also a great project. And again, it didn't have doorways that block stuff off, and everything bled into each other, but there was privacy that was created. So it's all this dance that, again, you get into the existing condition, you assess everything, and then you put pen to paper to try to figure out the best solution.
And quite frankly, I look to the coasts a lot. We see a lot of innovation there that eventually makes its way to the Midwest. So I always have my eye on New York, LA, and what's going on there to how to make these smaller spaces more efficient, more functional, but also more private too. Like there's just flexibility depending on where we're at in our lives and what we're going to use that space for. right? And then there's the iterations we go through with our clients specific to them in the moment too that we have to be mindful of.
Yeah, I think the if I recall, it's funny you say you look to the coast sometime. I think the inspiration from the carriage house that was in Victorian Village actually came from like a pre-approved LA ADU unit.
Yeah. So you remember the triplex we designed? I was looking at housing multifamily units in Oregon and Washington and Seattle, Portland areas, and they designed these triplexes to look like an actual single family home.
Yeah, like a house instead of this 3-unit behemoth.
To preserve the landscape of the street, but offer now 3 dwelling units instead of a single family.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and again, existing conditions, it's the pain point that we have to deal with. I think the lot that he had was just super narrow.
Yeah.
So immediately that constraint, you couldn't have this big unit that was like spread across this lot. You had to constrain it to this like 20-foot wide footprint, and that's all you could build on. And we just stacked them 1, 2, 3.
Yep.
So
and again, in that particular case, smaller units, just like ADUs, those tall ceilings made all the difference. You walk in, and because of a 9-foot ceiling, you're not feeling claustrophobic. So we want to make sure we're definitely thinking about the experience when you're in that space, especially if it's on the smaller side.
Yeah. Well, and all of these are going to be on the smaller side.
Right.
None of these are going to be, unless you have like acreage, if you have acreage down in Hawking, then you can do whatever you want.
Well, even then, then we have our process with septic and roadways and electric and all those things that we have to be mindful of.
Yeah, you're doing mirror houses there, right? Which are tiny. It's almost like a ADU unit.
20 by 10, 11 by 21.
Yeah. That would be interesting. Do you think someone would put a mirror house in their backyard? Because it has everything, right? It has a bathroom, has a small little kitchen area, bedroom, living room.
I think
someone could buy one of those and just plop it down, right?
The allure of a mirror house is floor to ceiling windows, right?
Yeah.
With privacy, because it's reflected on the outside. And if you're like in the woods, in our case, down there, that's an experience. That's amazing.
Yeah.
But in your backyard, I don't know. I feel like
your neighbors would never see it. That would be camouflaged.
Correct.
Kind of.
Let's try it. Let's try it and see how it goes. It might be a little more off-putting in somebody's backyard than in the forest.
I don't think that's a great idea. I'm just having fun with the conversation.
Okay, for our listeners, if we're thinking about an ADU, what would be the first steps? Like, can we call our design professional, have a conversation about what our options are? Like, what's our timeline behind this? What's this going to cost us?
Yeah, so you should anticipate a long timeline period, because again, things are not open and free to do whatever. So that's number one. And then, I think you start with the conversation of, hey, here's the location of the project. Here's the house and the site. What's the possibilities? And that's just the very first conversation out of the gate.
So give me a little bit more than a long timeline, like
a year.
I
mean, do you want specific? Year?
I think you're being very conservative there, because that was the commission that we went through. I think we can get
it's a long timeline.
I think it's going to be a little less.
You think
than
a little
that.
less?
Yeah.
All right. Well, the next one we'll have to take a bet. So I'll buy you a drink if I'm right, if you're right, and if I'm right, then you buy me a drink. We'll
those
bet
stakes
on
are
it.
low, Paul.
Well, all right. What do you want to bet? It's not like I'm going to buy you a new car or something.
But no risk, no reward.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's conservative, sure, but
you're playing it safe, which is fine. I think we can probably do it a little faster. And I think as we get closer to these policy changes in Columbus, because of what we're seeing nationally, I think it's going to get easier and easier.
I think the thing to note is that there are hoops to jump through. Yeah. It's not a process that is taking a week or so, right?
Sure.
It's a long, drawn out process. So be in it from the beginning, be ready from the beginning that it's going to be a long process.
Sure.
Whether it's 4 months, 6 months, 8 months, or 12, it's a long process. And again, we can knock something out quickly, but some of it's out of our control when it gets to the city. And
Correct.
The city and their process and what they want to see and what they want documented. It's just them being them.
So if this process is so long, what are we talking about expense-wise?
For us, again, that doesn't impact you're talking about cost for us to do it.
Yep.
it doesn't impact our cost dramatically because, again, a lot of it, we send it to them. They take their sweet time to review it, and then once they're done reviewing it, they send it back to us with some comments. And then we jump in for a few hours here or there, make whatever updates, go back to them maybe with another meeting. So our time, there's a little bit of additional time, but it's not like we're working on it for 6 months straight.
I agree. You are correct there.
Yeah. So like maybe you add 10 to 20 hours to a project to like get something like this approved. And if you're starting with our base price for a project like this, where you're doing like a small new build project, again, adding 10, 20 hours is not a huge amount of time or money that you're adding to your project.
And when you're in a neighborhood like Victorian Village and you're adding an entire house, an additional dwelling to the property, you're talking about a big increase in value in terms of what it's costing you to what the payoff is.
Yeah, if you can add $100,000 in value to your property, $150,000,
a lot more than that,
depending on where. Yeah. Obviously, right? Depends on the location, but easily you could add that. Yeah. So if you're paying, 10% of that for the whole design process and approval process, I think less. I mean, like, I think it's worth it, in terms of like the value you get out of it and what you pay to get it done.
Right.
And to build it, what's the cost to build it? Do you think this is more a question for you?
Yeah. And honestly, it's been varying depending on a lot of factors. If we're going up 2 levels with parking below, because garages are, you're going to want 10-foot ceilings in your garages. So, there's a lot of additional things to think about there, but it depends on the build. But usually, you're looking, if it's just a
like a 20 by 20. So what did we do in Victorian Village here? This was what?
The apartment above.
Yeah. It was the apartment above.
Was it 25 by 25?
I think it was like 20 by
25, something like that.
20 by 25, yeah. So again, basically like a garage on the lower level, a unit above. What do you think something like that would cost?
I think I was talking with the contractor, and I think we're around the 200 to 250 mark, depending on how we do with the finishes.
But because of the location, the value added, and having the additional unit and additional income, just the property value alone.
Yeah, it's adding about 350.
Yeah. So, the money he's putting in, he's going to get out of. And again, that's like now. So that's not even factoring in 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, what this is going to be worth. And when maybe he decides, okay, now it's time to sell.
And you're just talking about value. You're not talking about the cash flow potential.
No, I'm not even talking about the cash flow. During that time, having cash flow from that additional unit, I'm not even talking about that. Right. I'm just talking about the property value itself, because you're the owner, you own the land.
Right.
Yeah. So for me, that's like the wow moment, Yeah. So to pay your design professional for the 10 extra hours it's going to take to go through this process and get your approval, I think hands down, it does not make sense to say, no, I'd rather do something different,
No, I agree.
So, or no, I want to avoid the process because it's going to cost me another $1,000 or whatever, $2,000. It's like, come on, 10 to 20 hours. Let's do the time. And 10 years from now, you're going to have something that, is just the value you add is just, why would you not do it?
Yeah, I agree completely. Any other concerns about this? Any last topics we want to cover before we wrap this up?
I think we covered, the parking, the character, the community. I think we covered a lot of it. Don't put them in your house in your backyard. I was joking before.
Or we could try it out. We'd be curious to see how that works out.
If you really want to, your neighbors are your neighbors. That's not on us. So, but I would probably advise against it in most locations, unless again, maybe you're in the woods and it's this experience. Makes a little more sense versus in the backyard of a Victorian Village area or adjacent to Victorian Village wouldn't allow it. That's for sure.
Well, we can dive into that topic a little bit more when we have our episode about our property.
Yeah.
So, okay. Well, with that, we're going to wrap this up. If you guys have any questions about ADUs, regulations, please put it in the show notes below and we'll respond to those inquiries.
Yeah. Do you think we can do a link to like, maybe some images or something of some of the ADUs that we've done?
Absolutely.
Something like that. Like maybe we'll put together a PDF that has just a couple of the images for the Victorian Village project we did. So yeah, maybe we can do that, and we'll link to the article that we read through, just that spawned this. Again, we've done a few projects like this, but the one that kind of spawned the conversation. So we'll put links to all that up there, for you guys to take a look at.
Yeah, Danny will put a link for that. And again, I think that's going to wrap us up here.
Nino, you're lucky it's your birthday.
Nino, happy birthday. Happy birthday. I hope you're enjoying yourself. We're going to have to...
Yeah. He sent pictures of that. That thing was like a freaking ADU. It was an interesting design. He'll have to tell us about it on the next podcast.
Yep. We'll tackle him then.
Yeah.
If he shows up.
Yeah. Tackle him with what? Hugs and love?
That's right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll wrap up there. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks.
This has been the ArcFluence podcast. As always, you can get more information and additional content on arcfluence.com. Please subscribe on the platform of your choice and leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you.